Hey guys, it's Sam and welcome back to High Desert Gardening. Today I'm going to share with you guys how I process my plants to get ready for their final planting place, including hardening off, uppotting, and transplanting. So these plants were just brought out and they are undergoing the process of hardening off. Hardening off is a process where you take your young vulnerable seedlings and you acclimate them to the tougher temperature and conditions that they will be experiencing as young adults. Now, keep in mind the process can take up to 1 to 2 weeks for them to be fully acclimated. And it's kind of a lengthy and it can be kind of a tiresome process, but it's very important. And once your seedlings have been hardened off in the correct manner, once you get them transplanted into the ground or into your container, you'll have much better results because you'll have a less stressed out plant, and a healthy plant will give you a good experience and good result. As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, what I would first do is try to aim to take these out on an overcast day where the sun isn't bright and won't shine directly on them. If you need to start the hardening off process and you don't have an overcast day, then I would just take them outside for their first day and leave them outside in the shade where they get indirect sunlight. Now, make sure that your weather conditions are appropriate. If you're still having freezing temperatures or anything really below 50 degrees or so Fahrenheit, I would not recommend starting the hardening off process. One thing you could do is take them out during the daytime when the temperatures are warmer and then bring them inside for the night, which is something that I often do with my plants just to get a good head start. So after a couple days in the shade, in or in direct sunlight or in overcast weather, I start moving the seedling trays over into partial shade. So like in these trays right here, they're getting dappled shade throughout the day. They're not going to get direct sunlight at all for a prolonged amount of time, and that's the best thing you can do as the second step. So 2 to 3 days in indirect, barely any sunlight, overcast weather, etc. And then you start moving them to a little bit more sun. And you just keep doing this over the next several days consecutively. So I would do 3 more days in dappled shade, then slowly bring them out to a little bit more sun, etc. And as you keep doing that, the plants will start getting a lot more stronger and vigorous right before your eyes. So as you keep doing this process, like I mentioned before, it can take up to 2 weeks. I would try to be as patient as possible. I know that this isn't the most fun part of the gardening experience, and it can take a little bit of time and definitely requires patience. But go and be patient and go through the proper hardening process. Make sure the leaves aren't getting too damaged. Even if they are, most likely your plants will rebound as long as they're not scorched under the hot sun or the heavy wind or a heavy downpour. And as long as they're pretty healthy overall, you may sustain a little bit of leaf damage, but they will pop out new leaves within the next couple of weeks and look very healthy. So here are my plants. They've been in their pots a little bit way too long. I just haven't had a lot of time to go ahead and start potting them or planting them into their final locations. Um, I'm still trying to figure out where I'm going to plant everything as well, so it's taking me a little bit of time. So what can happen is sometimes your plants will start looking a little bit um, not so great because they're in these tiny pots. Tomatoes actually bounce back just fine, and this is a tomato plant. But as you can see, they're still in these small cells, and they're really outgrowing them. The leaves are changing colors where they're not as green anymore. So there definitely is a lack of nutrients, space, and I'm having to water very frequently because they're soaking up the water so fast as they're a little bit bigger now. So what I would recommend is, time everything appropriately if you can. I wouldn't sweat it even if you're a little delayed because, again, plants tend to have the will to survive and they will bounce back. When they're losing nutrients or turning yellow like this or just looking stressed out, what you can do is just apply a diluted fertilizer. So I always use natural fertilizers like fish fertilizer and at half strength, and I would spray my plants. And that's the only thing I did to revive them. So the next thing I'm going to show you guys is now that these are way overdue for repotting. I'm going to show you the uppotting process, and I'm going to also show you how I put them inside the ground. So here we go. For uppotting a tomato, you want to use a pretty tall container because their roots will grow deep, and I'll show you how to plant them. I'm using just a red solo cup here. These are pretty deep, and I'm filling it with my pre-moistened potting soil mix. Okay guys, so the first thing I'm going to do is take these transplants out. So I want you to look at the tomatoes first of all. As you can see, it's a long stem, and the reason I'm not worried about these things is they do pretty well. They can tolerate a lot of different things. So I'm just taking it out of its container, and look at those roots. So as a lot of you probably already know, tomatoes have these fine hairs along the stem, and each of those hairs has the capability of turning into a new root. So when I'm planting this, whether it's in my container for uppotting or into the raised beds, I'm going to plant as deep as possible. So the soil level, I want it to reach up to here where the first fork in the road is and where the branches are coming out. So let me take this out real quick and show you guys in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go and take this one out. He's in here by himself, so there's a lot more space, and what I'm doing is basically kind of squeezing this bottom area, loosening up the soil, and that should come right out. I don't really recommend tugging on these stems, but unless you have been doing this for a while, but the roots have grabbed, and you can see beautiful roots there. This thing's ready to go. So when I plant it into this cup, I'm going to try to plant it right about there, so as deep as I can. So I'm actually going to end up removing some of this potting soil that I put in, and then I'm going to plant that in. So I'm going to go and do that right now. Just going to leave just a little bit in there, just a small layer. Lower that a little bit in, and then I've got my cup, sticking that in as deep as I can. So this is allowing me only to go up that far, so that's what we're going to do. And then I'm just going to backfill the cup with the remaining soil. And each hair that makes contact with that moist soil, it's going to grow into a new root, making the tomato a lot more strong and sturdy. And that's it, guys, on how you pot a plant when it's ready to come out of those small little cells. And look at that, looks better already. Okay guys, for the next step, I'm going to show you how I planted in my raised bed. So this is more of a transplanting than uppotting. So the first thing you want to do is consider your plant and the location. With regard to tomatoes, the example that I'm using today, they come in two different versions. You have the determinate ones that kind of stay a compact size and you can plant them in containers. And then you have indeterminates that grow pretty long, and they grow as long as they can, really. So for those, you need a larger area, or you need to grow vertically along a stake or a trellis. So I already have some straight stakes and trellis built in this area right here. So I'm actually going to plant an indeterminate tomato in that area just because I have the trellis and everything already built in. So I'm going to go and remove this from its little cell and show you guys the roots. There's two in here. They look puny and worse for wear right now, but you'll be surprised at how well they do after they get the proper care that they need, including the uppotting or transplanting, whatever you're wanting to do. Another good way to do this, if you guys are afraid to pull them out, is by just using a regular kitchen fork. So anyways, there's the roots, looking good. So I'm going to implement the same process, plant them really deep, and you'll see how well they do afterwards. As you can see, there's already a trellis built in. I'm going to kind of decide the area I want to put them, probably right about here. And I'm just going to put one of them, but I'll set this in here for now. Okay, and for transplanting, I've got my everything that I'm going to need. So I've got my Biotone starter fertilizer here, my favorite stuff to use whenever I'm transplanting anything, and my shovel. All right, so I'm going to clear the area. Now these indeterminate tomatoes, they're a black crim variety, and they're going to climb all the way up this trellis here. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that area. Dig a small hole. We're not gonna need a huge hole for these because plants are still pretty small. So I'm gonna gently tease these apart. Again, I'm not too afraid of damaging roots. They came apart pretty easily here. I'm gonna plant this guy in here. And so what you wanna do, see my soil level is about there. And I wanna go as close to the top as possible. So I'm gonna dig it a little bit deeper. Or another thing you can do is just plant them on their sides with the leaves facing up at an angle. That works very well as well. So I'm gonna do that kind of, just angle it a little bit. And then I want to throw in some of that biotone starter fertilizer, gently scratch that in, and replace the soil. So it's gonna go all the way up to that very root. Now this is specific to tomatoes. You may not be able to do this technique with every other plant that you transplant. Most of the time you'll want to fill it to what soil level it was already at. So just gonna temp that in gently. Make sure you label so you don't have any regrets later. And finally, just water it in. And that's it on how to transplant and uppot your plants, specifically tomatoes in this example. They look really puny right now, but you'll be surprised as you follow along how vigorous they'll grow, and one day it's going to grow up this entire trellis. So subscribe and follow along so that we can keep you updated on what's going on with these plants, and stay tuned for the next video.